The storm had been building since afternoon, the kind that rolled off the Sierra Nevada with a grudge, turning Reno streets into dark rivers and driving every sensible person indoors. By 10 o'clock on that Friday night, the thunder had settled into a steady rhythm, shaking the windows of the Iron Wolves clubhouse on the eastern edge of the city like something enormous trying to get inside. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of whiskey and leather. 15 men filled the main room, some at the bar, some at the pool table, some just sitting in the heavy silence that comes when men who've spent their lives in motion finally stop moving. A country song drifted from the jukebox in the corner, half drowned by rain hammering the roof. Nobody was talking much. Friday nights at the clubhouse had a way of turning quiet toward the end, when the drinking shifted from celebration to something more private. Cole Hargrove sat at the head of the bar, his back to the wall the way he always sat, the way 20 years of hard living had taught him to sit. He was 50 years old, built like a man who had never stopped working with hands that told the whole story of his life without a single word. His road name was Reaper, earned in a bar fight in Tucson 17 years ago, and the name had stuck the way names do when they fit something true about a person. His hair had gone mostly gray at the temples. The lines around his eyes were deep. He had the face of a man who had seen the worst the world offered and had made peace with very little of it. He was lifting his glass when the knock came. 3 small sounds, barely audible through the thunder. So slight that for a moment Cole wasn't sure he'd heard anything at all. Then it came again. 3 knocks, soft and deliberate, like someone who had practiced the courage it took to make them. Cole set his glass down. The room had gone still. 15 men, all of them tuned to the frequencies of danger, the way only men who have lived close to violence can be had heard it too. Eyes moved toward the door. Nobody spoke. Cole crossed the room and pulled the door open. The girl standing on the step was 7 years old. She was soaked through, her dark hair plastered flat against her face, her small body shaking so hard her teeth were clicking together. Her shoes had come unlaced, and the laces dragged in the puddle that had formed at her feet. In her left arm she clutched a stuffed rabbit white once, now the gray of something that had been loved almost to destruction. Its left ear hung by a few threads. Across the fur and across the girl's right hand, there was blood, not a lot, but enough. She looked up at Cole Hargrove with eyes that had no business being that old, in a face that young, and she said the words in a voice so quiet they should have been lost in the storm. "Please help my mama. The bad men took her. They said they'd kill us both." Cole did not move. Behind him, he was aware of the room going absolutely silent, of glasses being set down, of 15 men holding their breath without knowing they were doing it. The jukebox kept playing. The rain kept falling. The little girl kept looking up at him with those eyes. He stepped back from the door. "Come inside," he said. "You're safe here." She hesitated for just a moment, the way a small animal hesitates at the edge of something unknown, weighing the danger of staying against the danger of moving. Then she stepped across the threshold, and Cole closed the door against the storm. The room watched her. She stood in the center of it, dripping onto the floor, clutching her rabbit, taking in the faces around her with the careful attention of a child who has learned that reading faces quickly is a survival skill. She was frightened deeply and genuinely frightened, but she was not panicking. There was a quality of deliberateness about her that Cole noticed immediately, a sense that she had made a plan and was executing it even now, even soaked and shaking and alone. He lowered himself to one knee so that he was at her eye level, his big frame folding until he was small enough to look at her straight. "What's your name?" he said. "Lily," she said. "Lily Ward." "Lily, I'm Cole." He kept his voice even, the way he'd learned to speak to people who were close to breaking. "Can you tell me what happened?" She took one breath. Then she started talking, and what struck him immediately was the precision of it. She wasn't hysterical. She wasn't rambling. She told it the way a person tells something they've been rehearsing in their head, organizing the details as they walk through the rain, because they knew the details would matter. Her mother was Sarah Ward. She was a nurse at County General Hospital. They had been walking home from the pharmacy 2 blocks from their apartment when a black SUV pulled to the curb. 3 men got out. One of them had tattoos on his neck and wrists, A snake coiled around a blade, the same image on both arms done in heavy black ink. The one who seemed to be in charge was taller, wearing a gray jacket, and when he smiled at her mother, Lily saw the glint of silver where one of his front teeth should have been. That man, the one with the silver tooth, had grabbed her mother by the arm. Another man had pushed Lily down onto the wet sidewalk. She had caught herself with her hands, which was where the blood came from. Her palms scraped raw on the concrete. The man with the silver tooth had leaned close to her mother and said something Lily couldn't fully hear over the noise of the street, but she caught the shape of it. Something about the hospital. Something about what her mother had seen. Something about how if her mother talked to anyone, they would both disappear. Then they put her mother in the SUV. The vehicle had turned left out of the alley onto 5th Street, heading east toward the industrial district. Lily had memorized the partial plate number. She had memorized the direction. She had memorized the face of every man she could see. Then she had stood up, wiped her hands on her jeans, and walked through the rain until she found a door to knock on. Cole listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, the room was still. The jukebox had cycled to something quieter. Nobody moved. From across the room, Dale Pruitt, who had been Cole's vice president for 11 years and carried the road name Hammer for reasons that required no explanation, spoke up. His voice wasn't cruel, but it was blunt the way his name suggested. Reaper, we're not social services. We can call the cops, get her somewhere warm, but this, she came to us, Cole said. He hadn't turned around. His eyes were still on Lily. That makes it our business. We don't know anything about this situation. Could be domestic, could be... She came to us. Cole said it again, quieter this time, and something in the way he said it closed the conversation. He turned to the man at the back of the room, a lean figure in his early 60s with the careful movements of someone who had spent decades being precise about everything. Doc Callahan had lost his medical license 18 years ago for a decision that would have gotten a worse man celebrated and a better man appointed to a position of honor. Instead, it had gotten him here, which was where he'd stayed. Doc, Cole said, take a look at her. Doc Callahan approached Lily the way he approached everything, slowly and without sudden movements, his eyes already reading the situation before he spoke a word. He crouched beside her and smiled a real smile, not the performance of one. Hey there, my name's Doc. I help people feel better. Mind if I take a look at your hands? Lily considered him for a moment. Then she held out her right hand. He was gentle and thorough. The palms were scraped but not deep. He cleaned them with supplies from the kit he kept behind the bar, his touch so practiced that Lily barely flinched. But as he worked, his expression was doing something. Cole recognized the controlled neutrality of a man who was seeing something and choosing not to react to it in front of the patient. When he'd finished with her hands, he checked the bruising on her left cheek. Then, with her permission and Cole's presence as reassurance, he looked at her arms. He stood and moved to Cole's side, positioning himself so Lily couldn't read his face. The scrapes are fresh, he said quietly, hour or two consistent with what she described. But the bruise on her cheek is 6 hours old, give or take, and there are older marks. He kept his voice below the ambient noise of the room. Finger-shaped bruising on the upper arms, faded but distinct. A partially healed cut at the corner of her mouth. These go back 2, maybe 3 weeks. Cole felt something cold settle in his chest. Defensive wounds on her palms are fresh, Doc continued, but someone has been handling this child roughly for a while. Whoever took her mother tonight, this wasn't the first time they made contact. They've been at this family for weeks. Cole looked back at Lily. She had accepted a dry towel from one of the men and was pressing it carefully against her hair with the quiet self-sufficiency of a child who was used to taking care of herself. She was watching the room, cataloging it, making assessments the way someone does when they have learned that the wrong read on a room can cost you. She caught Cole's eye and held it without looking away. He went to her and settled into the chair across from her. Lily, he said, the man with the silver tooth. Can you tell me anything else about him? Anything at all? She thought about it seriously, the way children do when they understand that thinking seriously matters. He was tall, she said, taller than you. His jacket was gray and it had something on the left side under the arm, like maybe a pocket or something that stuck out. He talked like he was in charge of everything. Not loud, but like he knew nobody was going to argue with him. She paused. He smiled at Mama when he grabbed her. Not a nice smile, like the smile was the worst part. Cole nodded slowly. And the snake tattoos. Both arms, both wrists, same picture. Black ink, a snake wrapped around something sharp. He straightened up and looked across the room at the corner where Ethan Briggs sat surrounded by the quiet hum of equipment. Ethan had been with Iron Wolves for 9 years, arrived from nowhere, with skills that nobody asked too many questions about. His road name was Ghost, earned not from any capacity for violence, but from a talent for moving through digital systems without leaving a trace. He was 34 years old and had the pallor of someone who spent very little time outdoors and made no apologies for it. Ghost, Cole said. You heard her? Ghost was already working. Cole moved to the center of the room. He stood with his hands at his sides for a moment, feeling the weight of every eye in the place. He had led this club through things that would have broken most organizations. He had made decisions that cost him sleep for years. He was not a man who gave speeches, but there was something that needed to be said tonight, and he had never said it before, not in 15 years of leading this organization, not to any of them. When I was 12 years old, he said, my sister came to me for help. Men were hurting her. She came to me because I was the only one she trusted. He stopped. The room was absolutely silent. Even the jukebox seemed to understand. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I thought if I waited, things would get better on their own. He looked at the floor for a moment, at the worn wood he'd looked at 1,000 times without seeing it. I found her 3 days later. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. I've been carrying that for 38 years. Every day. Every single day. He raised his eyes and looked at each face in turn. I'm not carrying it anymore. This girl walked through a storm and knocked on our door because she believed someone in here would help her. That belief is either worth something or it isn't. And I'm telling you right now, it's worth something to me. Hammer looked at him for a long moment. Something moved in the older man's face that had nothing to do with objection. Then he picked up his glass and set it down again and said nothing more. The room had made its decision. Cole felt it the way you feel a current change, not loud, not performed, just present. He went back to Lily. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite name. Not hope exactly, something more careful than hope. Something that had been disappointed before and was trying to decide whether to let itself try again. It was an expression he recognized because he had worn it himself in the years after his sister, in the years when trust felt like something that happened to other people. Your mama, Cole said, settling into the chair across from her again. She works at County General. She's a night nurse. She takes care of people in the serious ward. Lily's voice was steady in a way that took effort to maintain, and Cole could see the effort. Last week she came home really early. She didn't talk at dinner. She just kept looking at the phone like she was waiting for it to do something. Then a few days ago, she started moving things around in the apartment, putting papers in different places, making me practice walking to Mrs. Henley's house in case I ever needed to go there fast. Cole leaned forward slightly. She was preparing you. She told me if anything ever happened and I needed help, I should find the biggest building with lights on and knock on the door. She said people would help, that most people are good even if they don't look like it at first. Lily glanced around the room at the leather cuts and the weathered faces and the bottles behind the bar. I found your lights. Cole looked at the rabbit in her arms. The worn fur, the ear holding on by determination, and a few threads, the body shaped by years of being carried through everything a childhood contains. What's his name, he said. Mr. Cottontail. He's had that ear since I was 4. Mama says he's too old to fix properly, but he doesn't mind. She smoothed the hanging ear gently, a gesture so habitual it was almost unconscious. He's very brave. He's been scared tonight, but he didn't show it until we got inside where it was warm. Cole found himself looking at the rabbit for a moment longer than made sense. Then he said, Mr. Cottontail sounds like good company to have. He is, Lily said simply. He believes in you already, by the way. He does. He says you have honest eyes. He's a good judge of that. From somewhere across the room, Cole heard what might have been a sound quickly suppressed from the direction where Hammer was standing. He kept his expression neutral with some effort. Ghost looked up from his screens. His face had the particular stillness it got when he found something significant, the stillness of a man who has learned that reacting to information before you finish reading it is how you miss the most important part. Reaper, he said, you need to hear this. Cole crossed to him. Ghost had 4 windows open simultaneously, moving between them with the fluid efficiency of someone whose thinking happened faster in digital space than in physical space. The screens cast a pale blue light across his face in the dimness of the back corner. He pulled up a hospital administration record, first partially redacted but readable around the edges. County General 9 days ago. A patient was admitted through the private entrance on the north side, the one they use for VIP cases, after hours, emergencies, things they don't want logged through the main system. The admission record was flagged for restricted access within 12 hours, and the file was sealed by order of the hospital administrator. But the billing side didn't get the same memo, and billing never lies. He pulled up the second window. Tyler Aldrich, 22 years old, admitted under a private account registered to a company called Crestwood Consulting, which turns out to be a shell registered in Delaware, with a single director who is a law firm partner in Carson City, known for handling sensitive matters for people who need discretion. Ghost paused. Tyler Aldrich is Senator Gareth Aldrich's only son. History of substance abuse, 2 prior arrests for possession, both expunged. A third incident at a hotel in Las Vegas that was settled out of court for a number that has a lot of zeros. Cole kept his face still. Tyler Aldrich died in that room 9 days ago. The cause of death on record is cardiac event, natural causes. But the toxicology, which shouldn't exist but does because a lab technician filed it before the file got locked, shows fentanyl, not prescription grade. Black market, high concentration, the kind that's been showing up in quantity across 3 states in the last year and a half. Ghost turned to look at Cole directly. Somebody sold Senator Aldrich's son contaminated street fentanyl, and he died from it in a private room at County General, and somebody at that hospital signed off on calling it natural causes. Sarah Ward, Cole said. Sarah Ward was the attending nurse on shift that night. She was in that room. Ghost pulled up the third window. 5 days ago, someone placed surveillance on her personal phone. Not law enforcement. The signature is private contractor, the kind of equipment that requires significant resources and connections to acquire quietly. 3 days ago, 2 of her co-workers from that shift left town. One filed for a leave of absence, one simply didn't show up. Neither has been reachable since. He stopped for a moment, then continued. I found a police report from 11 days ago filed by a Dr. Raymond Coates, who was the attending physician that night. He reported concerns about the handling of the Aldrich case to the hospital ethics board. He died in a car accident 9 days ago, the night of Tyler Aldrich's admission. Interstate 80 eastbound single vehicle. The accident report says he lost control on a wet road. The room had gotten quieter around them without anyone making a decision to be quiet. Some of the men had drifted closer without appearing to the way people do when information is being exchanged that changes the size of something. Who's running this, Cole said. I'm getting there. Ghost opened the fourth window. There's an operation, no official name, but in the communications I've been able to access over the last hour, it gets referred to as the network. It moves pharmaceutical-grade fentanyl through legitimate distribution channels, using the infrastructure of licensed wholesale companies to push volume that doesn't show up as street dealing. The people at the top aren't street operators. They're executives, administrators, people with clean hands and expensive lawyers who have never been in the same room as the product they're selling. He looked at Cole. And the center of it, the financial architecture, the protection arrangements, the relationships with the distributors, it all traces back to one name. Warren Voss, pharmaceutical executive CEO of a company called Halcyon Meridian based in Phoenix with distribution contracts covering 11 states. And Senator Aldrich. Senator Aldrich sits on 3 Senate committees, including the one with oversight authority over pharmaceutical distribution regulation. He has received $740,000 in campaign contributions over 6 years from entities that trace back to Halcyon Meridian through a series of PACs. Ghost closed 2 of the windows. Sarah Ward is the only person from that room who is still alive, still in the city, and hasn't been paid off or vanished. She is the one thread they cannot afford to leave hanging, and she has a 7-year-old daughter they are apparently willing to use as leverage. Cole straightened up. He stood still for a moment, with the full weight of it settling onto him, finding its level the way water finds its level, settling into every low place. This was not a domestic situation. This was not a local criminal matter with local consequences. This was organized, resourced, connected to the highest levels of legitimate power and already proven willing to kill. The doctor who had tried to report it was dead. The co-workers were gone. And a 7-year-old girl had walked through a storm to ask for help because there was nowhere else she could go. He was still standing there when his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered it. The voice on the other end was unhurried and precise, with the quality of someone accustomed to controlling every room they entered. Not loud, not threatening in any performed way, just completely certain of its own authority, the way gravity is certain. Mr. Hargrove, my name is not important. What is important is that we both understand the situation we're in. Cole said nothing. You have something that belongs to us. Not the woman. The woman is a complication we're managing. The girl, she has seen faces and heard things that create a liability, and we would like to resolve that liability in the most efficient way possible. Talk, Cole said. We're prepared to release Sarah Ward unharmed in exchange for the child. You return Lily Ward to us by Sunday midnight, and her mother walks out of a location of our choosing at 1 a.m. Monday morning. You have my word. Your word, Cole said. I understand that may not carry weight with you, so consider the alternative. The alternative is that we come and take what we need. We know where you are, Mr. Hargrove. We've known since approximately 40 minutes after the girl arrived. She is not a difficult thing to track. A brief pause. I am giving you an opportunity to make a simple choice. Return the child and this ends cleanly. Refuse and things become considerably less clean for everyone in that building. Cole looked across the room at Lily. She was watching him. She had not moved from the couch, but she was completely alert, reading his face, reading the room, reading everything available to her. I want to speak to Sarah Ward, he said. There was a short silence, a sound of movement, and then a voice came through that was nothing like the first. Quiet strain, trying to hold on to control with both hands. I don't know who you are, Sarah Ward said, but please, whatever they're asking you to do, please just keep her safe. Whatever else happens, just... The sound that followed was sharp and involuntary. The sound a person makes when pain is applied without warning. And then the first voice returned. Sunday midnight, Mr. Hargrove. I'll expect your answer in the form of an action. The line went dead. Cole lowered the phone. His hand was entirely steady. Inside his chest, something had gone very cold and very quiet. The particular stillness that came over him before violence. The state his body entered when it understood that normal time was over and a different kind of time had begun. He turned around and found Lily standing 3 feet away. She had gotten up from the couch without anyone noticing, which he was beginning to understand was something she was capable of doing. She was holding Mr. Cottontail against her chest, both arms wrapped around the rabbit, and she had heard everything. All of it. Her face was pale and her jaw was set in a way that did not belong on a 7-year-old. A look of deliberate steadiness, of someone choosing not to come apart, because coming apart would not help her mother. They want to trade me for Mama, she said. It was not a question. Yes, Cole said, because she deserved the truth and she already knew it. You can't do that, she said. I know. Not because of me. She looked up at him with complete seriousness. Because they'll hurt her anyway. After they have what they want, they'll hurt her anyway. You know that, right? Cole crouched down to her level. He thought about how to answer that. He thought about whether she needed to be protected from the honesty of it. He looked at her face at the set of her jaw and the clarity in her eyes and understood that she did not, that she had already done the reasoning herself and arrived at the right place, and what she needed from him was not protection from the truth, but confirmation that he had gotten there too. Yes, he said, I know that. So you have to get her back a different way, the right way. You have to get both of us. She held his gaze with an intensity that made something move in his chest, something that had not moved in a long time. Can you do that? He looked at this girl, 7 years old, wet and cold and alone with blood dried on her palms and an old rabbit in her arms, standing in the middle of a room full of dangerous men as though she had every right to be there. She had walked through a storm and found a door and knocked on it 3 times. And she had done it because she had a plan and she was executing it step by deliberate step. He thought about his sister. He thought about the 38 years of carrying something that had never gotten lighter, only more familiar, the way a scar becomes part of the body you live in. Yes, he said, that's exactly what I'm going to do. Promise, promise. She studied him for a moment the way children study things when they are deciding whether to believe them. Not quickly. Thoroughly the way she did everything. Then she nodded a single decisive nod and went back to the couch and sat down with Mr. Cottontail in her lap, and the matter was settled. Cole stood up and turned to face the room. Ghost. Everything you found, I want it documented and backed up to 3 separate locations. I want floor plans of that industrial district, every building within 2 blocks of Tommy's Automotive on the east side. Their signal traffic is pointing there as the primary location. He looked at Hammer. Get on the phone with Ray Steele in Oakland. Tell him I need him in Reno by tomorrow afternoon. Don't explain why. He'll come. He'll want to know what he's riding into, Hammer said. Tell him a 7-year-old girl is being hunted by people who own half the city, and I need every man he's got. Cole picked up his own phone. He won't need more than that. He was right. When Ray Steele answered on the second ring and Cole said those words, there was a silence of perhaps 4 seconds. Then Steele said, I'll have 25 men there by evening. I'm calling the Desert Wolves and the Mountain Brotherhood. They owe me. That's more than one favor. Some things you call in, regardless of the count. Steele's voice was flat and certain. Nobody hunts children. Not in my territory, not in yours, not anywhere we can reach. That's not a rule anyone voted on. It just is. Cole ended the call and stood for a moment in the middle of the room. Around him, the club was moving men, picking up phones, moving to stations. The quiet, organized energy of people who had been waiting without knowing. They were waiting for something worth doing. Across the room, Lily Ward had curled up on the couch with Mr. Cottontail tucked under her chin. Her eyes were closed. Her chest rose and fell with the slow rhythm of exhausted sleep. On her face, for the first time since she had appeared at the door, there was something that looked almost like peace. The specific peace of someone who has done everything within their power to do and has handed the rest to someone else. Doc Callahan appeared at Cole's shoulder. She trusts you, Doc said quietly. Don't let that be a mistake. It won't be, Cole said. Doc looked at him for a long moment, the look of a man who has known someone long enough to know when they mean what they say. You said that like a man who means it. I do mean it. Good. Doc refilled his coffee cup from the pot behind the bar. Because she's been through more than a child her age should carry, and she still chose to trust someone. That's not a small thing, Cole. That's not a thing that comes back easy once it breaks. Cole looked at her sleeping face across the room, at the rabbit tucked under her chin, at the hands that had been scraped raw on concrete and cleaned and bandaged, and were now curled gently around the worn, stuffed body of something she'd carried since she was 2 years old. The rabbit had been with her through everything. That was what you could see in it, in every worn seam and softened edge. Not just the love, but the miles, the accumulated weight of every night. It had been held through something difficult. Outside, the storm was still running hard against the windows of the Iron Wolves clubhouse, rain and thunder filling the night with sound. Somewhere on the east side of the city, in a building that smelled of motor oil and cold concrete, Sarah Ward was alive and waiting, counting on something she could not name to reach her before Sunday midnight. And in the main room of the club, a 50-year-old man with 38 years of the wrong kind of weight on his shoulders stood watching a 7-year-old girl sleep and felt the weight begin to shift for the first time since he was 12 years old. Standing outside a door he was too afraid to open. He had made a promise. He had made promises before and broken them. He had a long history with broken promises, a catalog of them that he could recite on sleepless nights. But those had been promises to people who had eventually accepted the breakage and moved on. This was a promise to a child who had walked through a storm and decided to trust a stranger, and something in him understood with complete certainty that this was not a promise he was capable of breaking. Not because he was a better man than he had been before, but because he could not look at that sleeping face and be the kind of man who broke it. He went to the back of the room where Ghost was working and said, "Tell me everything about Tommy's automotive. Every detail, every crack in the wall, every shift change and guard rotation and structural weakness. All of it." Ghost nodded and started talking, and Cole stood there through the rest of the night, learning the shape of what he was going to have to do while the storm wore itself out against the windows, and Lily slept on the couch, and the clock on the wall moved without mercy towards Sunday midnight. The night consumed itself by the time Ghost finished talking, and what was left in its place was the particular gray that arrives before a Saturday morning, makes up its mind, light seeping under the door like something reluctant to be seen. Cole had not slept. He stood at the window with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago and watched the street outside come into focus, the way a problem comes into focus when you have been looking at it long enough from the right angle. The storm had moved east, leaving the streets washed clean and empty. Puddles reflected the streetlights in long orange streaks. In the parking lot, motorcycles stood in rows that had grown through the night as word spread, and men arrived ones and twos at first, then small groups, men from the Iron Wolves chapters across Nevada, who had gotten calls they didn't fully understand, but answered anyway. Because when Cole Hargrove called on a Friday night and said, "Come," the ones who knew him came. By 7 in the morning, there were 38 men in and around the clubhouse. By noon, there would be more. Lily woke up at 6:30, sat up on the couch with Mr. Cottontail in her lap, and looked around the room with the careful alertness of a child who has learned to take inventory of her surroundings before doing anything else. It was not the groggy disorientation of normal waking. It was immediate and deliberate, the eyes of someone who remembered exactly where they were and why. She found Cole at the window and her shoulders came down a fraction. She did not ask if anything had happened overnight. She seemed to understand that she would be told what she needed to know when she needed to know it, and that asking before then would not make it come faster. Nora Whitfield arrived at 7. Cole had called her at 2 in the morning, which was the kind of call that tests what people are made of, arriving out of the dark with something large and difficult inside it. Nora had answered on the third ring and listened without interrupting and said she would be there before dawn. She was 45 years old and ran the Whitfield House Women's Shelter on the north side of the city, a place she had built from nothing over 12 years with the particular combination of tenacity and gentleness that such work requires. She had the quality that certain people develop when they spend their lives in proximity to other people's worst moments, a stillness that was not distance, but something more like depth, like she had made room inside herself for things that would overwhelm someone less organized. She had been with Cole for 2 years some time ago, and the reasons it had ended were complicated in the way that things between good people who want different things are always complicated. She was here now because he had called her, and because a child needed someone who understood how to be present with children who had been frightened very badly, and Nora was the best person Cole had ever known at being present. She sat down next to Lily on the couch, without making a production of it, just settled in beside her with a paper bag that turned out to contain 2 blueberry muffins from the bakery on 7th Street that opened at 5. "I'm Nora," she said. "I heard you had a rough night." Lily looked at her with those assessing eyes. "You know Cole?" "I do." "Is he a good person?" Nora considered this with what appeared to be genuine seriousness, not the performed consideration of someone managing a child, but the real kind. He's trying very hard to be, she said, which I think might be the most honest answer to that question. Lily accepted this with a small nod and took one of the muffins. She ate it slowly and carefully the way she did everything, and she watched the room while she ate. Ghost called Cole over to his station at 8:15 with the particular tone in his voice that meant the information was significant and not in a good direction. He had spent the night going deeper into the communications he'd intercepted, following threads that branched and connected in ways that kept expanding the picture, and what had looked like a regional operation with political protection had resolved in the hours since midnight into something considerably larger. He spoke quietly, positioned so the words didn't carry across the room to where Lily was sitting with Nora. The distribution network that Warren Voss runs through Halcyon Meridian touches wholesale pharmaceutical accounts in 11 states. I've been tracing the financial flows, and they're obscured through a sequence of shell companies and overseas accounts that someone built carefully over a long time. The total volume is substantial enough that I sat back from the screen for a while when I finished calculating it. He paused. But that's not the part that changes things this morning. Cole waited. I've been tracking their internal communications. They use an encrypted channel, military grade, not something you'd normally crack in a night. I didn't crack it, but I found a back door through a protocol error in their relay setup, and I've been reading their traffic since about 3 a.m. He pulled up a window. They've pulled their people back from the street, all of them, consolidated at Tommy's Automotive, and they've been receiving deliveries since midnight, vehicles coming in through the back entrance, cases being unloaded. He turned to look at Cole directly. Weapons, significant quantity. They're not waiting to see what we do. They're preparing to come here. Cole's expression did not change. There's more, Ghost said. I've been cross-referencing the communication signatures, the language patterns, the specific phrasing in their internal messages. Someone has been giving them information about us. Specifics. The number of men we have here. The fact that we've been running surveillance on their location, the timing of our reconnaissance rotations last night. He paused and let the words sit there. Cole said nothing for a moment. He looked at the screen. He looked at the room, at each face with the quiet attention of a man running a calculation he wished he didn't have to run. Keep that to yourself, he finally said. Don't tell anyone else yet. Can you narrow it down? Working on it. But Cole, the more immediate problem is what comes next. Based on the traffic I'm reading, they're planning a move. Tonight. They're not going to wait until Sunday midnight. The deadline was a negotiating position. What they actually intend is to take the girl and eliminate the situation before we can coordinate a full response. Cole absorbed this. How long do we have? Best estimate based on what they've received and what they're still waiting on, 8 hours. Maybe 10. They need the dark. Cole straightened up and went back to the window. Outside, more motorcycles were turning into the parking lot. Ray Steele's contingent from Oakland had called ahead. The Mountain Brotherhood from Colorado had sent word they were on the road. The Desert Wolves from Utah had confirmed. 200 men was starting to look possible. He was working through the arithmetic of it when Lily appeared at his elbow. She had a way of arriving beside you before you'd heard her cross the room, moving with the careful quiet of a child who had learned that moving quietly was sometimes the same as being safe. She stood next to him at the window and looked out at the parking lot filling with motorcycles, at the riders dismounting, and the handshakes and the particular body language of men who have come somewhere with a purpose. Are all those people coming to help? She asked. They are. Because of me. Cole looked down at her. Because of what's right, he said. You just happen to be the one who reminded everyone what that looks like. She considered this with the serious attention she brought to everything. Then she said, is it going to be enough? He thought about what to tell her. He thought about what she had already survived, what she had already proven she could handle. He thought about the fact that she had walked through a thunderstorm alone at 7 years old because she had assessed her situation and made a rational plan, and that plan had brought her here, and here was turning out to be something. I don't know yet, he said honestly, but we're going to make it enough. She nodded at that, accepting it as the honest answer it was. And then she said something that stopped him cold. There's something hard inside Mr. Cottontail, she said. I felt it last night when I was trying to sleep, under the stuffing near his back. Something that doesn't feel like stuffing. Cole went very still. He looked at the rabbit in her arms, the worn fur, the hanging ear, the body shaped by years of being carried through everything a childhood contains every night and every difficult day. Where is it exactly, he said, and his voice was careful and level. Here. She pressed her fingers into the rabbit's lower back, and Cole could see from the slight resistance in the fabric that there was something solid beneath the surface. Not soft, not stuffing, something with edges. He knelt down. Lily, he said, can I look at it very carefully? She handed him the rabbit without hesitation, with a trust that sat in his chest like something heavy and warm and slightly painful all at once. He carried it to Ghost's station and set it on the table, and Ghost was already reaching for a seam ripper before Cole had to ask. The device was small, smaller than a matchbook. A GPS tracker with a battery designed to last 72 hours, the kind of equipment that cost enough money to tell you immediately that the people who had placed it were not operating on a street-level budget. It had been inserted through a seam that had been carefully resealed, the stitching close enough to the original to be invisible unless you were looking for it. It had been placed there before Lily arrived, before she left her apartment, before she ran. They had known exactly where she was from the moment she walked through the door. Ghost was already running a signal trace. Cole stood at the table and let the implications settle through him. The tracker was one thing, but placing a tracker inside a child's stuffed animal meant someone had gotten physically close to Lily before tonight, had access to the things she carried with her, had planned for the possibility that she might run, and had prepared accordingly. The phone is here too, Ghost said, separating the stuffing carefully with gloved hands. A small burner phone, powered off, tucked alongside the tracker in the cavity that had been created for them both. Cole looked at the phone. He looked across the room at Lily, who was watching from where she stood near the couch, her face very still, reading the situation with those eyes that took in more than they let on. She was smart enough to have already understood. He brought the phone and the tracker to the table and set them down. Then he went to Lily and crouched in front of her, getting down to her level the way he had at the beginning. Listen to me, he said. Do you understand what those are? They put them in to find me, she said. They knew I'd take Mr. Cottontail wherever I went. Yes, her jaw tightened. Something moved behind her eyes, a quick flare of something that was anger and grief in equal measure. Then she looked down at the rabbit on the table, and something in her face broke a little quietly and almost invisibly, the way something breaks inside rather than outside. They used Mr. Cottontail, she said. It was quiet and flat, and it contained everything that phrase could contain. The betrayal of it, the deliberateness. Someone had looked at a 7-year-old girl and identified the thing she loved most in the world and used it against her. They did, Cole said. The room had gone still around them. Men who had seen violence and ugliness of many varieties were watching a 7-year-old girl reckon with something and finding that it sat in them in a specific way, finding that it stirred something old and certain that had nothing to do with tactics or territory. Lily was silent for a long moment. Then she straightened her back with a deliberateness that was almost formal, like a decision being formalized. Okay, she said. Just that. Okay. One word containing a door closing on something, and another door opening toward whatever came next, a child choosing to keep moving because there was no alternative that served her mother. I need to keep the tracker, Cole said. Is that all right? Take it, she said. And the phone. She paused. Can you fix Mr. Cottontail's ear while you're at it? Behind Cole, someone he thought it might have been Hammer made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and something else. Cole kept his face straight. Doc can probably manage that, he said. The phone presented options. Ghost powered it on with gloves, examined its call history, which contained one outgoing call made 4 days ago and one incoming call made the previous night at approximately the time Lily had been at the clubhouse for 40 minutes. They had called to confirm the tracker was active and working. That was the only purpose of the call. But the call gave Ghost something to trace, and by early afternoon, he had followed it back through two relay exchanges to a cell tower in the industrial district on the east side of the city, the same district where Tommy's automotive sat in the middle of a block of warehouses. Ray Steele arrived at 1 in the afternoon with 23 men. He was in his mid-50s, silver-bearded, built like someone who had never found a good reason to stop being formidable. He had known Cole for 16 years and carried a debt between them that had never been discussed directly and never needed to be. He dismounted in the parking lot, looked at the assembled men, looked at the clubhouse, and walked directly to Cole. "Tell me everything," he said. Cole told him everything. When he finished, Steele was quiet for a moment. He looked toward the window where Lily was sitting with Nora, the two of them bent over what appeared to be a drawing Lily was making. "How old?" Steele said. 7. Steele looked at the window for another moment. Then he said, "The Mountain Brotherhood called me on the road. They're bringing 18 men. Desert Wolves confirm 15. I put the word out through the network general terms, just that there's a child involved, and the syndicate is running the operation. I've had 7 other clubs reach out asking where to come." Cole absorbed this. That's a lot of people getting involved in something that isn't their fight. "It became their fight when it became about a kid," Steele said simply. "That's a line that doesn't get discussed much because it doesn't need to be. Everyone already knows where it is." The afternoon moved with the controlled urgency of preparation. Ghost built a detailed picture of Tommy's automotive from satellite images and utility records and the communications he'd been monitoring, and what emerged was a building that had been deliberately selected for its defensibility. Single road access from the front, the rear, backing up to a drainage canal. Elevated firing positions on the roof at the northeast and southwest corners. A communications array on the north wall. Ghost was estimating between 40 and 50 armed individuals inside, with training signatures suggesting military or paramilitary background. The plan that Cole built with Steele and Ghost through the late afternoon was a 3-wave assault. The first wave would draw defensive fire from the west and identify the roof positions. The second wave would breach the perimeter from the north, pushing into the ground floor. Cole's wave, the smallest 8 men, would move through the service entrance at the rear, while the building's attention was fully occupied by the first 2 waves. Sarah Ward was on the second floor northwest corner. Cole would go up and bring her out. The plan required the element of surprise. At 4:17 in the afternoon, Ghost came to Cole with the information that the element of surprise was gone. He had identified the leak. One of the men who had arrived overnight, a member of the Las Vegas chapter, who had been with the organization for 3 years, had been sending information through a secondary channel. Communication signatures, numbers, the planned timing of the assault. Cole looked at the information for a long moment. Then he told Ghost to keep monitoring without alerting anyone, and he and Steele walked the man out of the clubhouse quietly and had a brief conversation in the parking lot that ended with the man sitting in the back of a vehicle under the supervision of 2 of Steele's men. The damage had already been done. They knew the 3-wave plan. They knew approximate numbers. They knew the intended timing. Cole scrapped the plan and started over. He was in the middle of this when Lily found him. She appeared at the edge of the table where Cole and Ghost and Steele were bent over maps and printouts, and she waited until Cole looked up because she had learned that waiting for people to look at you was more effective than demanding they do. "The phone," she said. "The one from Mr. Cottontail." "What about it?" It rang again. She held his gaze steadily. 20 minutes ago, I answered it." The room went quiet around them in a way that was different from the previous silences, more complete. Cole made himself breathe evenly. He made his voice stay level and deliberately consciously warm, because what was on her face was not defiance. It was the expression of someone who had done something they understood might be a mistake, and had come to say so as soon as they could, because honesty felt more survivable than silence. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said. "He called," the man with the low voice. She did not look away from Cole's face. "He said he knew I was here. He said he could see the building from where he was. He said if I didn't tell him where Mama was being kept, he would hurt her so badly she would never wake up." Her voice did not waver, but her hands had tightened on Mr. Cottontail until the worn fabric pulled slightly. So I told him I didn't know. I told him Mama wasn't here. He laughed and said he already knew I was lying because he could see me. Then he said something about Mama that I couldn't hear because I hung up. A pause. And I came to find you right away. I didn't wait. Cole looked at Ghost, who had already checked the phone, and was looking back at Cole with the expression that confirmed the call had been brief and incoming, and that the trace gave them nothing new. The tracker had already told them everything. The call had been something else. An intimidation attempt, maybe. A test of what the girl would do. He looked back at Lily. You did the right thing coming to tell me, he said. I shouldn't have answered, she said. I knew I shouldn't. I knew it was probably them. But it rang and I thought for 1 second that maybe it was Mama somehow. That maybe she had found a way to call me. She pressed her lips together. I know that doesn't make sense. It makes complete sense, Cole said. You thought it might be your mother. Of course you answered. That's not a mistake, Lily. That's love. She looked at him for a long moment, checking this against something internal. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be, Cole said, and he meant it all the way down. What you did or didn't do tonight is not what put you in this situation. The people who put that device in your rabbit and took your mother, they are the only ones responsible for what's happening. Every part of it. Do you understand me? She was quiet for a moment. Then you really mean that? I really mean that. Something released in her face, not completely, not the way it would release in a child who hadn't learned yet that the world could make you hold tension in your body like a permanent resident. But something. What do we do now, she asked. It was the right question, asked the right way by someone who understood that the point of analysis was to produce action, not to substitute for it. Now we change the plan, Cole said. What came next happened with a speed that outpaced all their preparation. Ghost had predicted 8 to 10 hours based on the supply deliveries he'd observed and the communication patterns he'd been reading. What Ghost had not fully accounted for was the information the leak had already provided, which had given the syndicate a confidence that compressed their timeline. They no longer needed to wait for full readiness. They believed they knew exactly what they were walking into. They came at 8 o'clock. The first indication was a change in the quality of the night outside engines that were not motorcycles moving in coordinated approach from two directions simultaneously. Ghost caught it on the frequency scanner. At the same moment, Cole heard it, a burst of encrypted communication whose pattern said coordination, said execute, said now. Then the windows at the front of the clubhouse came in. The sound of automatic weapons fire is nothing like what is represented in films. It is louder than you expect and somehow more physical, more immediate, rattling through a building the way a violent storm rattles it, finding every gap and weakness in the structure. Glass came in with the first volley, a long tearing burst that sent everyone in the front half of the room to the floor. Cole dropped behind the bar, heard the wood above him being chewed through in a diagonal line, and rolled left toward the gap at the end. Hammer's voice cut through the chaos, trained and even. Contact front, at least 12 shooters in the lot, taking covered positions behind the vehicles. Return fire opened from the windows. The room became light and noise and the smell of cordite, and beneath it all, the sound of men coordinating without panicking, because these were not men who panicked easily. Cole got to the back hallway, reached the door of the side room, where Nora had taken Lily at the first sound of breaking glass. He pushed the door open. Nora had Lily behind the heavy oak wardrobe in the corner, both of them low. Lily was pressed against Nora's side, with Mr. Cottontail against her chest, and her eyes wide but focused, tracking Cole as he came through the door with the particular attention of someone who is frightened and managing it through information. We're moving, Cole said, now. He moved them through the hallway, staying below the windows, through the kitchen, into the door at the back of the storage room that opened to stairs going down. The basement was concrete and low-ceilinged and smelled of old oil and decades of storage, and at its far end was a door that Cole had not shown to anyone outside the core membership. Not to the visiting clubs, not to anyone who had arrived in the last 24 hours. He had not told Ghost about it either, which had been a decision he'd made 4 hours ago when the leak was identified when he started building the part of the plan that belonged to him alone. The passage was 40 feet of low concrete tunnel that ran under the property line and emerged through a heavy door into the basement of the hardware store that shared the block. He had used it once before 6 years ago. He had told no one since. He led them through in darkness, one hand on the wall, Lily between him and Nora. Behind them, muffled by concrete and distance, the firefight continued, bursts and lulls, and the particular percussion of men fighting for ground. In the hardware store basement, Cole stopped. Nora already knew from his face what was coming. "There's a car in the alley," he said. "Gray Ford keys are under the left rear wheel. Take the I-80 west to Fernley. There's a motel called the Sagebrush Lodge. Family run. The owner's name is Walt Deering. Tell him Cole sent you. He'll put you somewhere safe and he won't tell anyone you're there." Nora looked at him. "Cole, take her," he said. "That's the job right now. That's the most important job." Lily was looking at him with an expression he would not forget for the rest of his life. Not angry, not frightened, something more complicated than either. "You're going back," she said. "Yes. Because of the men fighting. Because of a lot of things." She looked at him for a long moment in the dim light of the basement. Then she held out Mr. Cottontail toward him. He looked at the rabbit. "For luck," she said. "He's braver than he looks. He thinks you should have something to come back for." Cole took the rabbit. He held it for a moment, this worn and patched and endlessly carried thing, and felt the weight of what it represented, the miles, the nights, the accumulated trust of a child who had kept carrying it through everything, because some things are worth keeping. Then he handed it back. "You hold on to him," he said. "I'll come back for both of you. That's the promise." She took the rabbit and held it to her chest and looked at him with those eyes that were too old for her face and too clear for everything she'd been through. "Okay," she said. He turned back toward the tunnel. "Cole." Nora's voice, quiet and even, stopped him without pulling at him. He stopped without turning around. "Come back." "Working on it," he said, and went back through the darkness toward the sound of the guns. The fight at the clubhouse had reached the kind of equilibrium that precedes catastrophe when Cole came back up from the basement. Iron Wolves and allied men held the interior syndicate forces, held the parking lot and the approach streets, and both sides were bleeding. He came through the kitchen low and fast, got behind the bar, found Hammer running the room's defense from behind the overturned pool table. "7 down," Hammer said without preamble. His left arm was bandaged roughly with something that had been a bar towel. "They're trying to flank us from the south side. We've pushed them back twice. They'll try again." Reinforcements. "Ghost says ETA 15 minutes, maybe less." 15 minutes. Cole ran the numbers and did not like them. They were holding but barely, and holding was not winning. And 15 minutes of additional assault force would tip the balance in a direction that would not recover. He got to Ghost's position, sheltered behind the server rack in the back corner, with the screen still running on battery backup. "The communications," Cole said. "What are they saying?" Ghost pulled up the feed. Movement orders, converging vectors, a tightening of the circle from multiple directions. "I don't see a way out of this," Ghost said. It was not despair. Ghost spoke about impossible odds the same way he spoke about everything, with the precision of someone who preferred accuracy to comfort, who thought that honesty was a form of respect. Cole heard something outside. He thought at first it was part of the battle, another layer of sound in the complex noise that had become the whole world for the past 40 minutes. But it was different. It was coming from farther away, and it was growing. Engines, not vehicles. Motorcycles. Many of them. More than could be counted from the sound alone, the individual notes blurring together into a frequency felt in the chest as much as heard by the ears. A sound like weather, like something the sky was producing. "Ghost," Cole said. "What's on the perimeter cameras?" Ghost switched to the feeds. He cycled through them in silence. Then he stopped. He turned and looked at Cole with an expression that Cole had not seen on Ghost's face before in 9 years. You need to see this, Ghost said. The camera showed them coming from the east, from the north, from the south, on the overpass headlights and running lights strung out across the pre-dark city like a river of light motorcycles by the hundred converging on the block from every available road. Club patches Cole recognized. Club patches he'd never seen before. Men from states that weren't Nevada riding towards something they'd heard about through a network that no one owned and everyone used. Who sent the call, Cole said. I don't know, Ghost said. It went out across the regional network sometime in the last 2 hours. I've been monitoring every channel we use and I can't find the origin. One line. He read it off the screen. Syndicate is hunting a 7-year-old girl in Reno. All clubs respond. Nothing else, no source, no sender anyone could trace. Cole would ask in the weeks that followed and no one would claim it, and eventually he would stop asking and accept that some things don't need an explanation to be true. What mattered was what happened next. 200 men hit the syndicate's assault force from every angle simultaneously. The attackers who had been converging on the clubhouse found themselves on the wrong side of the arithmetic, surrounded by numbers they had not planned for, by men who came without strategy or coordination, but with a unity of purpose that required no planning because it was based on something simpler and older than tactics. Nobody hunts children. 200 men had come to make that real. The syndicate's force broke within 20 minutes. Some fled, some surrendered. When it was over, the parking lot and surrounding streets were full of men from a dozen different organizations who, under ordinary circumstances, had nothing in common, no reason to stand in the same place. But this had not been ordinary circumstances. Cole stood in the parking lot in the aftermath and felt the specific quality of stillness that comes when violence ends and the air hasn't settled yet into understanding what comes next. Hammer came and stood beside him. The older man looked at the assembled crowd for a moment. Then 11, he said quietly. We lost 11 men tonight. Cole received that. 11 men. Men with names he knew, with histories in this organization, with families in scattered places who would receive calls that would change everything. 11 men who had come because they were part of something that mattered and had paid the highest price that something can ask. He stood with the weight of it and let it be what it was, because there was no other way to receive it with the respect it deserved. A man he didn't know came and stood in front of him. Gray beard, heavy frame, mountain brotherhood patch. Carter, the man said. We came when we heard. Thank you, Cole said. Don't, Carter said. It's not a favor. It's not a debt. It's just right. He looked at Cole steadily. You've still got a job to finish. The woman's still in there. Cole looked east toward the industrial district, toward the building where Sarah Ward had now been for 31 hours. Then we should talk about what comes next, Cole said. Ray Steele appeared at his side, and Ghost came behind him with his tablet, and the men who would plan the next thing gathered without being called, because they understood that the night was not finished, and neither were they. Cole's phone showed a message from Nora sent 40 minutes ago, safe. She's sleeping. He looked at the message for a moment. He thought about a 7-year-old girl in a motel room in Fernley with a worn stuffed rabbit and a trust that had been placed in him without reservation and had not been qualified or withdrawn even when things got hard. He put the phone in his pocket. All right, he said. Here's what we're going to do. The plan they built in the hours after midnight was simpler than the one it replaced, and simpler was better. Cole had learned that in the Marines and relearned it many times since in different contexts. Complexity was a luxury for people who had room to fail. They did not have room to fail. Tommy's Automotive occupied the middle of a block in the industrial district, flanked on the east by a drainage canal and on the west by warehouses that had been empty long enough to forget what they had been built for. The building itself was 2 stories concrete construction from the 1960s, the kind built to last because the people building it assumed the future would need what was inside. The syndicate had reinforced the ground floor windows with steel sheeting, installed elevated firing positions on the roof at the northeast and southwest corners, and run their communication array from the north wall. Ghost had identified a service entrance at the rear of the building, accessible from the canal side, that the cameras did not cover, and that the communication traffic suggested was used primarily for supply deliveries. It was not the most obvious approach. That was the point. 3 waves rebuilt from the ground up. The first wave, 60 men from the Mountain Brotherhood and the Desert Wolves, would approach from the west along the main access road at 4 in the morning, drawing fire and attention. The second wave, 80 men under Ray Steele's direction, would breach the north perimeter 9 minutes later, pushing into the ground floor. These 2 waves were the noise, the pressure, the thing that would pull every armed man inside toward the front and the sides. Cole's wave was 8 people, himself Hammer, with his arm bandaged and his jaw set against argument, Ghost and 5 men he had chosen because he had seen them under pressure and knew how they moved. They would go along the canal path to the service entrance while the building's attention was elsewhere. They would go up. Sarah Ward was on the second floor northwest corner, as far from the roof positions as you could get inside that building. Ghost had confirmed her location through thermal imaging and communication traffic. She was alive. The traffic made that clear. She was a resource the syndicate intended to use at Sunday midnight, and resources don't get used if they're dead. 31 hours since 3 small knocks on a door in a storm. Cole called Nora at 3 in the morning. She answered quietly, which meant Lily was nearby and sleeping. "How is she?" he said. "Sleeping. She fought it for a while. She wanted to be awake when you called." A pause. "She made me promise to tell her everything the moment she woke up. She said she'd know if I left anything out." "She probably would." "Cole," Nora's voice dropped further, "come back from this. That's the plan. I'm not asking about the plan. I'm asking you to come back." He held the phone for a moment and listened to the silence on the other end that contained everything that hadn't been said between them in the years since things ended, all the complicated truth of 2 people who had wanted similar things at different times and in configurations that hadn't lined up the way either of them needed. "I'm coming back," he said. "I promised a 7-year-old girl." He could hear in the silence that this was the right answer because it was the most honest one. They moved out at 3:55. The canal path was unlit and the footing was uncertain gravel and mud and occasional concrete remnants of things built and abandoned. Cole moved at the front of the 8-man line with Ghost behind him and Hammer at the rear, covering 300 meters without speaking, communicating through signals that needed no rehearsal because these were men who had moved together in darkness before. At 4 o'clock, the first wave hit the west approach. The sound reached them even at the rear of the building. The wave of noise that comes when many engines accelerate simultaneously, followed almost immediately by weapons fire, opening up from the rooftop positions. Cole heard it and kept moving. The plan was working, or it wasn't, and he would know which when he got inside. The service entrance was a steel door secured with a commercial lock that Ghost had the override for from the building's maintenance records. He had it open in 40 seconds. They went through in single file into a concrete rear corridor that smelled of machine oil and the cold of a space climate controlled for equipment rather than people. The sounds of battle at the front of the building were louder inside, conducted through the structure itself, a low, continuous vibration beneath the percussion of weapons fire. Cole could hear shouted commands from above, movement on the floor overhead, the coordinated noise of people responding to the assault from the front and north. Steele's wave had hit the north perimeter 2 minutes ago on schedule. The building's defenders were fully occupied. Cole took his team up the service stairs. The second floor had been partitioned into rooms, the kind of improvised construction that happens when a space gets adapted for purposes it wasn't designed for. Plywood walls, hollow core doors, temporary lighting. The northwest corner was at the end of a corridor that turned left from the top of the stairs and ran perhaps 30 feet to a door with a padlock on a hasp. Cole took in the corridor in the second it took him to reach the top of the stairs. He took in Victor Crane at the same time. Crane was standing in the center of the corridor with his back to the locked door and a pistol pressed to the temple of the woman beside him. Sarah Ward was on her feet, which told Cole something about her before he knew anything else about her. She had been held for 31 hours and beaten badly enough that the damage was visible from 15 feet away in poor light, but she was standing under her own power with her spine straight. When her eyes found Cole's face in the dim corridor, They were entirely present, frightened, yes, in pain clearly, but not gone, not emptied out. Still there, still taking in information and processing it with the alertness of someone whose mind had refused to stop working. Crane was tall, taller than Cole had expected from Lily's description, which had itself been accurate about everything else. The gray jacket was gone, replaced by tactical clothing. The silver tooth caught the corridor light when Crane's mouth moved into something that was not quite a smile. "Mr. Hargrove," Crane said. His voice was the voice from the phone call, unhurried and precise. "I thought you'd use the canal." Cole stopped. He was aware of his team behind him, aware of the geometry of the corridor, running the calculations that 30 years of experience had made automatic. There was no clean shot. Crane had positioned himself with Sarah as a complete shield. The corridor was narrow enough that there was no angle from which the calculus changed. Any shot went through Sarah to get to Crane. "It's over," Cole said. "The building is compromised. Your people are either running or down. Senator Aldrich and Warren Voss are going to be in federal custody by morning. Whatever they offered you for doing this, they won't be in a position to pay it." "I appreciate the intelligence briefing," Crane said. "None of it changes what's happening in this corridor. What's happening in this corridor is that you're going to let her go." "What's happening in this corridor," Crane said, "is that you're going to put your weapon on the floor and tell your men to step back, and then you and I and Mrs. Ward are going to walk out of this building together." Cole did not move. He was watching Crane's eyes. Not the gun, not the hand's eyes, because eyes tell you about the moment still forming, not the moment already started. Crane's eyes were professional and steady moving in a pattern Cole's face. The men behind Cole, the door behind Crane, back to Cole's face. A triangle. Predictable because even the best trained people fall into patterns under pressure, and patterns can be timed. Cole was also watching Sarah Ward. Her right hand was at her side. Her fingers were curled around something small and irregular that he couldn't see from this distance but could infer from the angle of her wrist, the way she was holding that hand slightly away from her body, protecting whatever was in it from contact with Crane's arm where he gripped her shoulder. She had something in her hand. She had been in that room for 31 hours, and she had spent some of that time preparing. Cole kept his eyes on Crane's and did not look at Sarah's hand again. "You're right that men like me go home to something," Cole said. He kept his voice conversational, unhurried. "I go home to a 7-year-old girl who walked through a thunderstorm alone because she believed someone would help her. I go home to a promise I made to bring her mother back." He took one step forward, not aggressive, just closing distance by a foot. "I've broken a lot of promises in my life, Crane. I'm not breaking this one." Crane's eyes moved through their triangle. "Touching," Crane said. "Put the weapon down." "You said we're not different," Cole said. "You were a soldier. You believed in something once. What did you believe in?" Something shifted in Crane's expression. Small but real, a slight change in the quality of his stillness, as if something that had been moving just beneath the surface stopped for a moment. "Don't," Crane said. "You believed in protecting people," Cole said. "That's what they found in you. That's what they used and ruined, but you believed in it first." He kept his voice even. "The girl whose mother you took is 7 years old. She carried a stuffed rabbit through a storm because it made her feel less alone. She held my hand while she slept because she was terrified and I was the person she decided to trust." He paused. "She trusted me the way she used to trust that the world was safe. The way you probably trusted it once, before." Crane's jaw tightened. Cole saw Sarah's fingers move. A slight repositioning. A shift of weight that Crane did not register because his attention was on Cole, on the threat in front of him, not the one he was already holding. Cole took another step forward. "Don't come closer," Crane said, and the pistol pressed harder against Sarah's temple. "I'm going to put my gun down," Cole said, and began to lower it slowly, the way you lower something when you want every eye in the room to follow it. Every eye followed it. Sarah moved. Her right hand came up fast and sharp, and the piece of glass she'd been holding, a shard from a drinking glass broken in that room at some point in the last day and a half, opened a 4-inch cut across Crane's inner forearm before he fully registered that she was moving. The pain was immediate and severe, and his grip on the pistol loosened by a fraction, not much but enough. And Sarah twisted her body away from him with the total commitment of someone who has decided that the next second is the only thing that matters. Cole was already moving. He crossed the distance the way his body still remembered from 20 years ago from training burned deep enough that it doesn't require thought, just activation. His shoulder hit Crane's chest and drove him back into the door, and the pistol discharged into the ceiling. And then Cole had the gun hand controlled and brought his elbow across, and Crane went down against the door hard. What followed was brief and not graceful, the way actual violence is never graceful. When it was over, Crane was on the floor with his hands secured behind him, and Cole was crouched over him, breathing hard, and the pistol was on the baseboard 6 feet away. Cole looked at Sarah Ward. She had caught herself against the wall and was standing with her hand pressed to the cut on her forearm, not deep, not serious, but bleeding. She was looking at Cole with an expression that contained several things at once: relief, pain, and the specific quality of someone who has been running on fear and adrenaline for so long that the cessation of immediate danger registers as a kind of vertigo. "Mrs. Ward," Cole said. He kept his voice steady. "Are you able to walk?" "Yes," she said. No hesitation. "Yes, I can walk. We're going to get you out of here." She looked at him for a moment, and in that moment, he saw Lily in her face. The same quality of steadiness, the same refusal to come apart when coming apart would be the easiest thing available. "Lily," she said, "she's safe. She's been safe since last night. She's waiting for you." Sarah Ward closed her eyes for 3 seconds. That was all. Then she opened them and straightened up from the wall and said, "Then let's go." They came out of the building through the service entrance, moving faster now, Cole with Sarah on one side and Hammer on the other. The sounds of battle had changed character, the sustained fire giving way to sporadic bursts, the audio signature of a fight that is broken and is resolving. In the parking lot, what Cole found was the aftermath. 200 men standing in the pre-dawn dark among the wreckage of vehicles and the debris of a sustained firefight. The syndicate's force had broken completely. Ghost's equipment showed the encrypted communication channel had gone dark 20 minutes ago. Whatever command structure had been coordinating the defense no longer existed. Ray Steele found Cole coming out of the building and looked at Sarah Ward with the expression of a man who has spent hours preparing for an outcome that might not happen. "You got her," Steele said. "She mostly got herself," Cole said. Sarah leaned against the side of a vehicle and let Doc Callahan, who had materialized with his bag, begin examining her. She had injuries that needed proper hospital attention, but her mind was fully functional and her eyes tracked everything around her with the alertness of someone taking notes. Agent Cecily Drummond appeared at Cole's shoulder 20 minutes later. She was in her early 50s, gray-streaked hair, the careful bearing of someone who had spent decades walking into situations that other people were walking out of. Ghost had identified her operation 3 hours ago, cross-referencing the surveillance patterns around Tommy's automotive over the past months. "You've been watching this place," Cole said before she could speak. "For 8 months," she said. "We needed more before we could move. Last night accelerated the timeline considerably." "You're welcome." She looked at him steadily. "I need Crane, alive and intact, which from what I understand is how you've delivered him. I need his testimony to close the case against Aldrich and Voss. Without it, we have evidence, but we have lawyers who can fight evidence. With Crane's testimony, we have everything." Cole considered her. He had spent enough of his life in opposition to people who carried federal credentials that cooperation did not come naturally. But he thought about Lily in a motel room in Fernley, about Sarah Ward standing against a vehicle 30 feet away, while Doc checked her ribs, about 11 men who had not come out of the last 12 hours. "I'll talk to him," Cole said. "Why would he listen to you?" "Because he told me I was predictable," Cole said. "And I want to show him he was wrong about that too." Crane was sitting against the exterior wall of the building with his hands secured and a field dressing on his forearm, and he looked smaller than he had in the corridor, which was the way it often went when the geometry of a confrontation changed. The silver tooth caught the early morning light when he looked up at Cole approaching. Cole sat down on an overturned crate a few feet away, not standing over him. Level. Neither of them spoke for a moment. In the east, the sky was beginning its slow change from black to the specific dark blue that comes before dawn acknowledges itself. You were right that I used the canal, Cole said finally. Marine thinking, Crane said. Take the hardest approach. You think it makes you unpredictable. It makes you very predictable to people trained the same way. Maybe, Cole said, but I'm here and you're sitting against that wall, so something in the approach worked. Crane's mouth moved, not quite a smile. The woman surprised me. I didn't account for her. Most people underestimate her, Cole said. Her daughter does the same thing to people. Must run in the family. Something crossed Crane's face at the mention of the daughter. Cole let the silence sit and do its work. There's a federal agent here, Cole said. She's been building a case for 8 months. She has the financial records, the communication intercepts the shell company structures. What she doesn't have is a witness who can put Aldrich in the room, someone who received orders directly and can testify to the chain of command. He looked at Crane steadily. You can give her that. And in return, protection, new identity, whatever arrangement she's authorized to offer. Cole paused. But that's not the reason I'm asking. Crane waited. I'm asking because a 7-year-old girl had a stuffed rabbit that she's carried since she was 2 years old, and the people you worked for put a tracking device inside it. They used the thing she loved most to find her so they could kill her. Cole's voice stayed level. She's 7 years old, Crane. She still believes the world is basically good. She knocked on a stranger's door in a thunderstorm because she believed someone would help her, and she was right. And I would like her to keep believing that the world works that way. I would like that to be true for her for as long as possible. He paused. The men who ordered this, if they don't go to prison, they'll come back. Not now, not soon, but eventually. People like Aldrich and Voss don't stop. They rebuild. And the next time there might not be a door to knock on. Crane was quiet for a long time. Around them, the light was changing the sky, going from dark blue to gray-pink in the east, and in the improving light, the parking lot looked different than it had in darkness, smaller and more ordinary. The wreckage, just wreckage. The assembled men, just men who had come a long way for something that mattered to them. My mother raised me in Bakersfield, Crane said. His voice had changed a register, slightly moved away from professional and towards something older. My father was not present. She worked nights at a grocery distribution center and days at a laundromat until I was old enough to enlist. She came to my graduation from basic training, and she cried the whole time, not from sadness. She thought I was going to protect people. That's what she told me after. She said, now you'll protect people. Like that was the thing she'd been waiting to know. Cole said nothing. She died 8 years ago, Crane said. Before I'd done most of what I've done. She died thinking I was still that person, the one she raised. He looked at the ground, at the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. I've thought about that more than I've thought about anything else. More than the jobs, more than the money, more than any of it. I've thought about her standing there at that graduation crying because she thought I was going to protect people. The dawn was coming in full now, pale gold, preceding the actual sun, and the mountains that rimmed the city were beginning to define themselves against the lightning sky. Tell the girl something for me, Crane said. Cole waited. Tell her there are still good people in the world. Tell her she was right to knock on that door. He paused. And tell her I'm sorry, that I wasn't one of them. He looked up at Cole. Get your federal agent. I'll give her what she needs. Cole stood up. He looked down at Crane for a moment, at this man who had made a sequence of choices that had led him here, to this wall, to this morning, to this particular conversation, with the particular first light of a Sunday in Nevada falling across his face. I'll tell her, Cole said. And he would. He already knew exactly when. He went and found Agent Drummond and told her Crane would talk, and she went with 2 of her people, and Cole stepped away and found a space at the edge of the parking lot where he could see the eastern sky and the mountains beginning to catch the first of the sun. Ghost found him there 15 minutes later. The arrests are happening, Ghost said, looking at his tablet. Aldrich was taken from his home 40 minutes ago. Voss is in custody in Phoenix, picked up at his residence at 5 this morning. The police captain, the one with the accounts we traced, was arrested at his home 20 minutes ago. He paused. It's done, Cole. The whole structure. Cole looked at the mountains. He thought about 11 men. He thought about what Ray Steele had said, that they had come because it was right, not because it was a favor. He thought about whether that made the cost acceptable, and found that it was not a question with a clean answer, that some costs just sit on you and don't resolve into something cleaner or lighter over time. You carry them because they deserve to be carried the same way you carry the names of people who mattered. He would carry those 11 names the way he'd carried his sister's name, because they deserve to be carried. His phone showed a message from Nora. She's awake. She wants to know. He called instead of texting. Nora answered, and he heard in the background the particular silence of a motel room in the early morning, the kind of quiet that exists in places between other places. She's right here, Nora said. A brief rustling, and then Lily's voice came on, careful and controlled, the way she was always careful and controlled, but with something underneath it that was barely being held. Did you keep it? She said. I kept it, Cole said. Your mama's on her way to the hospital right now. She's hurt, but she's going to be fine. You can see her in a few hours. The sound that came from the other end of the line was small and involuntary. A single exhaled syllable that contained everything a 7-year-old who had been holding herself together for 32 hours had been holding. Okay, Lily said. Her voice was slightly unsteady, and she was clearly not going to acknowledge that. Okay. Thank you. I told you I would. I know. A pause. Mr. Cottontail says thank you too. Tell him he's welcome, Cole said. And tell him his ear is going to get fixed today. Doc already promised. He ended the call and stood for another moment at the edge of the parking lot, looking at the mountains and the morning coming in full over the city, and thought about a door and 3 small knocks and a child standing in the rain with everything she had left. The county general emergency entrance was the same one Sarah Ward had walked through hundreds of times on the way to her shift, and Cole stood outside it in the late morning sun while Nora parked the car and helped Lily out of the back seat. He watched the girl cross the parking lot toward him with Mr. Cottontail in her arms, and her eyes scanning ahead for something they hadn't found yet. The rabbit's ear was still hanging by threads. Doc hadn't gotten to it yet, but Cole had made the call, and Doc had promised it would be done before evening. Lily found Cole's face and stopped. She's inside, Cole said. Room 412. She's been asking about you since they brought her in 2 hours ago. Lily looked at the hospital entrance. She looked at Cole. She looked at the entrance again. Then she reached up and took Cole's hand. They went in together through the automatic doors in the antiseptic cool of the lobby, past the nurse's station, where 2 people recognized Cole in a way that suggested the events of the previous night were already known here down the corridor, with the linoleum and the fluorescent lights and the particular quiet of a building organized around the business of repair. Room 412 had a window that faced east, and the morning sun was coming through it at an angle that fell across the bed and the woman sitting up in it. Sarah Ward looked bad in the way that injuries always look worse in morning light. The bruising vivid and comprehensive across her face, her left eye swollen nearly shut, her left arm in a support bandage, her right hand connected to an IV line. She looked like someone who had been through the worst 32 hours of her life. She looked up when the door opened. Lily stopped in the doorway. 2 seconds of absolute stillness, mother and daughter looking at each other across a hospital room in the Sunday morning light. And in those 2 seconds, everything that had happened in the past 32 hours existed in compression. The storm and the door, and the rabbit in the dark corridor, and 11 men and 1 promise kept. Then Lily crossed the room. Sarah made a sound that had no language in it, purely physical. The sound a body makes when something it was protecting against turns out not to be needed anymore. And she opened her arms and Lily went into them, and Sarah held on with the arm that wasn't connected to the IV with a completeness that made Cole look away. He stood in the doorway and looked at the wall opposite, and let the moment be what it was, which was not his to watch, but his to have made possible. Hammer appeared beside him from somewhere which was becoming a habit. The older man looked into the room for a moment and then back at the corridor, and he said nothing because there was nothing that needed saying, and Hammer had always known the difference. After a while, Sarah's voice came from inside the room. "Cole." He looked in. She was looking at him over Lily's shoulder, her good eye wet, her expression containing something that did not resolve into a single name. "Thank you," she said. It was not enough words, but it was everything that words offered for what she meant. He understood that. "She found us," he said. "I just opened the door." Lily pulled back from her mother just enough to look at Cole across the room, and the look on her face was the look of someone correcting a factual error. "You did more than that," she said. He did not argue with her. He had learned in the past day and a half that arguing with Lily Ward was not a productive use of anyone's time or energy. He did, however, cross to the chair beside her mother's bed and sit down in it because there was something he had promised Crane he would do, and this was the moment for it. "There's something I need to tell you," he said to Lily. "Something a man asked me to pass on to you." Lily looked at him, waiting. "The man with the silver tooth," Cole said. "After everything was over, we talked, and he asked me to tell you something." He paused for a moment, finding the right way to carry it across. "He said to tell you that there are still good people in the world, that you were right to knock on that door." Cole looked at her steadily. "And he said to tell you he was sorry, that he wasn't one of the good people, but that he knew they existed because he'd spent the night watching them." Lily was quiet for a long moment. Sarah had gone still beside her, listening. Then Lily said in the matter-of-fact tone she used for things she had already worked out, "I know there are still good people. That's why I knocked on the door." She paused. "You can tell him that, if you see him again." Cole looked at her for a moment. "I think you just answered something he's been asking himself for a long time," he said. Lily considered this. Then she nodded once, the way she nodded at things that were settled, and turned back to her mother, and that was that. Nora found Cole in the corridor 20 minutes later. She stood beside him, and they looked at the closed door of room 412 together without speaking for a while. "She told me in the car," Nora said finally, "that she chose our door because of the motorcycles. She said motorcycles meant the people inside knew how to go fast when they needed to." Cole considered this. "That's actually fairly accurate." She also said Mr. Cottontail told her the light inside looked warm. Nora paused. "I asked her how a stuffed rabbit could tell her something. She said she didn't know, he just did." Cole looked at the door. "Nora," he said. "Don't," she said, but not unkindly. "Not right now. There's time." "Is there?" She looked at him with the expression she had always used when she was deciding how honest to be, when she was choosing between the comfortable version and the true one. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I think the man I see standing in this corridor is someone I'd like to find out with. The man who went back through that tunnel when he didn't have to. The man who sat down on a crate and talked to the person who had just tried to kill him because a child needed the world to make sense." She paused. "That's someone worth knowing. That's someone worth the complicated parts." He received that and held it. He thought about how he'd spent years using the complicated parts as a reason not to try using the history and the weight of what he was as evidence that what he could be had a fixed ceiling. Standing in this corridor, he understood that he had been wrong about that. The man who had gone back through the tunnel was the same man who had always been there underneath the accumulated weight of 38 years of carrying the wrong thing. He just hadn't known it until a 7-year-old girl knocked on his door and showed him. 8 months later, on a Saturday afternoon in early spring, Cole sat on the front step of the Iron Wolves clubhouse in the late sun watching the parking lot where the motorcycle stood in the kind of stillness that only exists when everything is settled into place. The building behind him had changed. Not the structure, the same concrete and steel it had always been, but its character, the quality of what happened inside it and why. Doc Callahan held a clinic on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, free to anyone who needed it. No questions about how injuries had happened. Nora had set up a coordination office in the back room for the network of shelters she was expanding across the region. 3 new locations in the past 6 months, all of them quietly funded by a combination of sources that Cole preferred not to think about too carefully. The main room had acquired in the incremental way that places acquire character when people stop performing what they are and simply become it, the feeling of somewhere things were figured out rather than just endured. 11 names were on the wall inside, carved into a piece of oak that Hammer had worked on for 3 weeks. Not a memorial exactly, more like a record, a thing that said these men were here and they came when it mattered, and that is not a small thing and will not be treated as one. Cole thought about those 11 names the way he'd thought about his sister's name for 38 years, except differently. He carried them not as failure, but as weight that had produced something the way certain weights do. Not lighter for that exactly, but different in kind. He heard her before he saw her. The light, quick sound of sneakers on concrete, and then Lily Ward was sitting down beside him with Mr. Cottontail in her lap. The rabbit's ear had been reattached by Doc Callahan the same afternoon she'd arrived at the hospital. The thread a slightly different shade than the original, but the stitching solid and careful, done with the same attention Doc brought to everything. Lily had examined the repair for a long time before declaring it acceptable, which Cole understood to be high praise. She was 8 years old now. She had grown an inch since October. She still had those eyes, and she still moved with that deliberate quiet, and she still arrived beside you before you'd heard her cross the room. They sat in the late afternoon light for a while without talking, which was a thing they had learned to do together over the past 8 months, the comfortable silence of people who have been through something and come out the other side still standing. Cole thought about the courthouse 2 months ago, a judge named Patricia Holbrook with the specific patience of someone who has processed enough paperwork to know that the paperwork is never the point. Lily in the courtroom chair with her feet not quite reaching the floor, swinging them slightly in a way she'd have stopped immediately if she'd noticed herself doing it. The moment when the judge looked up from the documents and said that as far as the court was concerned, Cole Hargrove was now Lily Ward's legal guardian, her godfather in the eyes of the law, with all that the designation entailed. Lily had made a small private nod to herself, the nod of someone receiving confirmation of something they already knew. On the way out, she had taken his hand in the lobby and held it until they reached the car, and had not made any comment about it, which was how she did everything that mattered. "Do you regret it?" Lily said eventually. "Regret what?" "Opening the door. That night." She looked at him sideways from under the dark fall of her hair. "Everything that came after." Cole looked at the parking lot, at the mountains visible beyond the city, at the sky going gold and copper in the west, the way Nevada skies do in the late afternoon colors that seem improbable until you're looking directly at them. He thought about 11 names on an oak board inside. He thought about what had been built in the space those names had helped clear. He thought about Lily in a courtroom chair with her feet swinging. He thought about the door and the 3 knocks and the rain and a child standing in it with everything she had left in her arms. He thought about Victor Crane sitting against a wall in a Nevada parking lot at dawn, saying that his mother had thought he was going to protect people, and the way his face had looked when he said it. He thought about what Lily had said when he'd passed the message on. "I know there are still good people. That's why I knocked on the door. It's the best thing I ever did," he said. "No regret, not a single one." Lily considered this with the seriousness she brought to all conclusions, testing it against everything she knew, checking it for flaws the way she checked everything for flaws. Then she leaned her head against his arm and looked at the parking lot with him. "Good," she said. "Mr. Cottontail agrees." The sun finished its work on the mountains, and the light changed to something softer and more forgiving. The kind of light that makes ordinary things look like they were always meant to be exactly where they are. From somewhere inside the building came the sound of voices, Doc's and Nora's and Hammer's, the ordinary sound of people in a place where they belonged, doing the ordinary things that happen when somewhere becomes somewhere. In the parking lot, a mockingbird landed on the handlebars of the nearest motorcycle and sat there for a moment, looking around at the world with the bright assessing eye of something that goes everywhere and belongs nowhere and therefore belongs everywhere. Lily lifted her head and watched it. The bird held its position for a breath, 2 breaths, 3. Then it flew straight up into the wide Nevada evening, climbing until it was just a small, dark shape against the gold, and then not even that, just sky. "Where do you think it goes?" Lily asked. Cole watched the empty sky where the bird had been. "Wherever it needs to," he said. Lily thought about this for a moment, turning it over the way she turned everything over, examining it from multiple angles before she was satisfied with it. Then she settled back against his arm and held Mr. Cottontail a little tighter, and the evening came in around them, and from inside the building, the voices continued, and the motorcycle stood in the parking lot, catching the last of the light, and everything that had happened to bring them to this particular step on this particular evening existed in the quality of the silence between them, carried not as weight anymore, but as the shape of something that had been made. Cole sat with it. He had opened a door one stormy Friday night because a child had knocked on it 3 times, and everything that he was now, everything that this place was now, everything that was possible in the days and years ahead had come through that door with her. He had been carrying his sister for 38 years, carrying her as the thing he had failed to do. What he understood now, sitting in the late spring light with Lily's head against his arm, was that his sister had been carrying him too all that time, carrying him toward the moment when a door would open and he would finally be the person she had needed him to be. He had just needed someone to knock.